Welcome to the Tax and Subjects podcast brought to you by Drake Software. I'm your host, Ryan Norton, and today we're joined in the studio by Drake Software Vice President of Internal Operations, Jami Gibson. Welcome back to the show, Jami.
Thanks, Ryan. It's great to be back.
It's great to have you. Now, if you're listening, today we are going to talk about security, specifically password security, and what you can do with password security, how you can get a good, secure password, as well as towards the tail end of the program, talk about what Drake Software and just software developers in general, what they have to do with respect to passwords. Before we get started, Jami, could you talk to us about your role at Drake Software and with the Security Summit?
As the Vice President of Internal Operations at Drake Software, I oversee fraud prevention and compliance as well as business development. And as part of my position at Drake, I am also a co-lead with the IRS Security Summit, which is an initiative that was started by former IRS Commissioner Koskinen to help prevent identity theft, tax refund fraud.
Could you talk about the working groups, like the working group that you are part of and how they work together within the Security Summit?
Absolutely. So there's 6 different working groups as a part of the Security Summit right now. There may be more players in the tax system than people actually think of. You have your taxpayer, you have your tax preparer, you have your do-it-yourself online filer systems, you have the IRS, and then you have the state taxing authorities, financial services, and so on and so forth. So in order to cover all the different players within the tax system, the 6 groups were made up to make sure everybody's interests were well presented. So I am one of the industry co-leads on the authentication group. The purpose of the authentication group is to secure taxpayer and tax preparer accounts, as well as to provide information to the IRS and states regarding the filing characteristics that come through on a tax return. In addition to that, there's the information sharing group I'm not a co-lead on, but a very active part of. What the information sharing group does is we kind of take the motto, if you see something, say something. So if somebody in industry sees an emerging tax refund scheme, or somebody at the states catches a W-2 scheme, then we have a central place that all that information can be reported to and disseminated amongst all of the parts of the tax system. In addition to that, we have a tax pros group, which makes sure that the initiatives that are developed by the Security Summit and the working groups play out and work well in the tax preparer space, as well as a communications group that kind of gets all the necessary information out into the tax system. We also have the STAR working group, which is kind of a first that we've seen in any type of industry outside of government regulations, in that their goal is to ensure that the systems that are supporting tax filings are actually secure. They're up to date on their Windows patches, they have certain firewalls in place, so on and so forth. In addition, the last working group is financial services, and the goal of the financial services group is to ensure that the deposits that each financial institution are receiving are expected, that the name on the deposit matches the name of the account holder, so on and so forth. So.
All right. So I guess now that we know about what the various working groups do, let's kind of jump into then password security. Sure. And I suppose the best place to start is the beginning. How do you create a secure password?
Well, as with technology and security, it's changing every day. It's emerging. A lot of the current thoughts right now are actually moving from passwords into passphrases. There's a lot of theories which have played out to be true that the longer a password is, regardless of how it's created, meaning whether it's numbers, letters, or symbols, that the longer the password is, the harder the password is to break and to be decrypted by hackers. So the piece of that brings into a lot of people into trouble is that trying to memorize what all these passwords are.
Right.
So the longer the password is, in some people's mind, the harder it is to remember. However, it's also easier to create something that's more meaningful to use. So whereas you go from, okay, I have 8 to 12 characters to try to figure out what I want my password to be for this site or this login or this credentialed piece of software, I can't think of something in 12 digits that accurately describes that I can remember. Right. So it's still a best practice to this day to create your password based on numbers, letters, and characters, though there's a lot of emerging research and technology coming out that say that may or may not be the case. It's very important to create a password that is something that is unique to that specific credentialed account. Password reuse is the biggest problem that we are facing right now as consumers. Right. And the fact that the trend of keeping the same password amongst many websites means that password only has to be compromised one time. And I actually read an article. I actually only read it this morning, even though it came out August 2017. It just showed up in my alerts this morning, where a specific research company that I don't really want to name has discovered that 87% of people that have 40 or more credentialed accounts use the same 5 passwords every single time.
Oh, that is discouraging.
It is discouraging.
Yeah, because like that, and for example, with Akwa Fax, which was a breach that I'm pretty certain everyone knows about, like if that password was used for other things like your bank account, they have a direct line in, and that's the name of the game for these people, is to get money.
It is the name of the game, and one thing that is very important for people to understand is that they think, oh, the LinkedIn data breach that happened in 2012. Why do they want that information? They want that information because you're probably reusing that password on some site somewhere that you may not even remember. And the hackers, they're not after your LinkedIn account anymore. They're after a various widespread variety of other consumer sites, banking websites, purchasing websites, social media, anywhere that they can log into your account using those credentials for some sort of gain for themselves.
Yeah, personally, apparently my Apple ID was compromised. And what they had done was they did not change my password, which is what you think would happen. They get in, they change your password, and they're going to use it for whatever purpose, like whether it's to download music or something else. What they were doing was using my account as a mule where they would store stolen Apple devices. So like what you said, it's always for some gain. And in this gain, it was to use someone else's Apple ID to try to keep their stolen device under the radar and harder for Apple to detect. So
yes. The number of schemes that are out there is completely mind-blowing to me. And a lot of them, unbeknownst to a lot of consumers, is they're not necessarily even after financial gain. They could be after any number of things. So,
what would you recommend as a means for generating a password that you can remember, and one that would then also meet the criteria for being secure and hard to break. I know that I've read about this thing called diceware, and it sounds like it's a software, but all it really is just you print off a sheet that has a number of words, and each word has a number associated with it. And then you literally get out a set of dice, and you roll the dice, and you take each number. It'd be 5 numbers, and then you find the corresponding word, and you build, like you were saying, a passphrase from that series of words that you roll up. And the more words, as you said, the longer the password, the more secure. And I know that's one method that some people have recommended, especially with respect to passphrases. What else is available? Like, is there a way that I can find a program that will generate passwords, or is there something else out there to help us out?
There are a lot of programs out there that will generate random passwords for you and actually store those passwords for you and log into sites for you. An example would be you could have an app on your smartphone in which you have a master password that you have to remember yourself. The keys to the kingdom, right? That you have to remember yourself. You log into this app and say, hey, I want to go check my Gmail account, and the app handles all of that for you. There's also some browser-based password keepers, highly unrecommended, because at least with a app on your smartphone, you have your smartphone password, you have your master password. On browser-based, it's a single point of failure. As far as the generation of passwords, I don't think the human brain is really capable of creating a random password and actually remembering it. Of course, there are mathematicians and whatever who are way smarter than me. I'm not good at memorization. You can ask my Bible school teacher from back in the second grade. But there's a lot of theory around how you can create a somewhat random password that makes sense to you. And in your own mind, generate a randomizer for every different site that you go to. I've employed that myself some, and I will say I have about a 70% success rate with it. So, that's great. Yeah. As far as programs, or what's the right word? Functions of sites like diceware. Again, there's a finite number.
Right.
There's a finite number of combinations, right? So a hacker has all the time in the world to create a password or passphrase, depending on how long you want to make it, from something such as diceware, that is hackable and predictable.
Right.
So, leading
off from that point about how, given enough time, a hacker will get through whatever password you've created, whether it's one from diceware or from one of the pseudo-random number seeds that are available on online password generator websites. How often should someone change their password?
So that's a really interesting question, and something that we are dealing with a lot within the Security Summit right now, and as software developers and providers of a consumer product. Up until the latest NIST publication, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, what NIST does is they put out what they call guidelines for what companies should be doing for best practices and minimum standards to provide a secure service, website, ecosystem of their own systems in this day and age. And the publication NIST 863-3, if anybody wants a really long, arduous read, actually has guidelines in there that says they no longer believe that changing passwords unless they've been compromised is a good practice. And the reason for that is and I fully admit I've done this before plenty of times in the past. So I go to pay my bill on xwebsite.com, and it says, oh, you need to change your password. I'm like, oh my goodness, really, again? So I type my password and then say ended in a 1. Now it ends in 1 2. Right. How easy is that? So even industry is slow to change. The consumer sites are slow to change. This is new to all of us. It'll probably be slow to implement, never expiring passwords unless in case of a compromise. But it seems to be a trend that the security experts are taking right now. And we haven't seen great success in password changes. They don't seem to provide any additional layer of security. And whether it's because people are just appending the next letter or another exclamation point, or whether it's that it's led people down the path of storing their passwords in an unsecured manner, who knows?
Speaking of storing the multiple passwords you have to have for each website, what are experts saying right now about password managers like KeePass and LastPass?
Sure. So there's no foolproof way to store your passwords. Anything that's stored electronically can be compromised electronically with enough time and enough effort of whoever the fraudster or the hacker may be. As of right now, pretty much anything's better than a pen and a piece of paper, right? Yeah. But anything browser-based, whether it's Google, whether it's Internet Explorer or Keychain on iCloud, definitely not recommended. Again, like I said earlier, it's a single point of entry. Right. As far as KeePass and other password-saving apps, again, you have a twofold barrier there to get into your phone, and they have to know your master password. Several of these password keepers applications have been hacked in the last few years. So again, they're not foolproof. And another method that is not highly recommended, it's still a double entry point, would be an encrypted file on the hard drive of your computer. Because again, as long as you have credentials to log into your computer, different credentials to log into your encrypted file, it's still a double barrier. Again, that relies on not reusing passwords or your double just went to single. And there's actually even a theory of, rather than, if you choose to keep this sort of file on your computer, that rather than storing the actual password itself, you store a hint as to what that password may be. I don't know. There's no foolproof way, so.
Yeah. The number of articles that will tell you either use a strict passphrase that doesn't have numbers, it's just words so you can remember it better, or use the minimum 12 digits with special characters and numbers as well as upper and lowercase letters. If you just go out there and Google this stuff, you're going to find a pretty good variety of suggestions as to what you should do. Which is why it's always a good idea to listen to the people at the Security Summit to try to get your marching orders when it comes to securing your data and your client's data.
Well, as far as creating your password with upper and lower and special characters, I actually heard this really interesting tip at a seminar that I went to last fall, where we've all seen the introduction now of allowing spaces and emojis into passwords. So I'm a programmer at heart, basement programmer. And one of the things that always bit me when I was programming was not trimming the spaces off of the end of data. So I thought, what if I put spaces at the end of my password? If it gets compromised and it's in plain text, you can't see the spaces.
That's interesting. And
it is interesting.
How many, or are there any in the wild, like Gmails or your, like say you're logging a Drake tax? Are there any software out there that will allow those spaces currently?
There are softwares out there that will allow it. Mainly, probably, I think the greatest implementation of that right now is in installed software, because it's easier for the computer to interpret than, say, in a web browser, because the space, as we know, translates into a certain character to the web browser. But I definitely think that the allowing of not only spaces but also actual emojis is something that we'll start seeing as a commonality.
Yeah, I can only imagine that would increase the amount of entropy in the password that you're creating at that point.
Absolutely.
When we did touch on briefly software developers like Drake Tax, is there currently in, like, say, this year's software, is there a requirement to change your password? I know we had touched on what the current research is saying, but for this year, is there a requirement to reset your password? And if there is, how often?
There is, as part of the authentication working group within the Security Summit, the recommendation that was decided upon was to require an 8 to 15 digit character password, and that password expire periodically. For example, every 90 to 180 days, but not less than twice per year.
Understood. Another thing in my notes I have here is about, I believe it's system timeouts.
Sure.
With, like, say, if I'm processing a return, what is the current rule set surrounding system timeouts with, say, tax prep software?
Absolutely. So in if it's a web-based software, the current is 20 minutes. If it's an installed software, like on somebody's desktop, is 30 minutes.
What is the research behind the timeout? What do they say is the rationale behind having software timeout? What is the security gain?
The security gain mainly there is obviously in the web space. If you're on a public computer, say you went to the library to file your tax return or start filing your tax return, and you walked away from the computer, anybody can walk into it. If the software hasn't timed out and asked for you to re-enter your password, then the person who walks up to the computer has access to everything you've done up until that point. The major concern actually in installed desktop software is not an actual in-person human threat, but in the event that your computer has malware or a Trojan or a keylogger or any type of breached VPN system, you leave your software open, you leave for the night, the hacker, fraudster, they VPN malware into your machine, your software's left open, now they have access to everybody's tax data.
Right.
That's right there on your computer. And the number of VPN and malware takeovers has been on a continual rise since 2015. So it's an actual real threat. A lot of people, and we probably all tend to be this way. I know I would never do that. That would never affect me. It happens dozens of times a day. Dozens.
Yeah. And especially for tax pros, that is, as most people who listen to the IRS press releases know, getting a hold of either your software to file those returns or just getting the taxpayer's information off of your system is essentially a gold mine for them. Whether it's that new scam we talked about last time, where they're going to try to trick you into giving them the erroneously issued refund, or if it's just directly having that money forwarded to a new address.
Absolutely. Compromised taxpayer data gives the fraudster and the criminals a way to file a tax return that looks exactly like that taxpayer's return would normally look. It has their same employer on the W-2. It has their same children with the correct birth dates, and I can't think of a better gold mine for a criminal than to have not only full PII, but federal tax information and state tax information that are historically Correct.
All right. Well, we've covered passwords, and we've covered some of what software developers have to do to try to help keep your data safe and your clients' data safe.
Sure.
Next time, we're going to come back and talk some more about security and how your role at the Security Summit may play into that topic. But for today, that'll be all. And just want to thank you again for joining us. Look forward to talking to you again next time.
All right.
We'll see you all in the next Tax and Subjects podcast.